You may not think twice about what you reach for, first thing in the morning. But for Lillian, 74 and retired, those quiet habits became her anchor, familiar, comforting, unchanged. She wakes to silence, moves slowly through the kitchen, and waits for her favorite blue teacup to warm her hands. Yet some of these gentle routines, so ingrained and beloved, quietly challenged her heart. This is the story of how small shifts helped Lillian reclaim her mornings and her strength. But Lillian, like many women in their 70s, began to notice that she felt different, not just older, but heavier in her chest, slower in her steps. She wasn't unwell, exactly, but she wasn't well either. Her body was whispering something, she just didn't know how to listen yet. Lillian hadn't always been cautious. In her younger years she was a whirlwind, raising 3 kids, managing the house, volunteering at church, cooking Sunday roasts. But grief changed her. After her husband passed, her world grew quieter. That silence, at first unbearable, slowly became her comfort. Her mornings were the only part of the day she felt in control of. Structure gave her a sense of peace. Wake up, sit on the bed, breathe, walk to the kitchen, boil water, sip tea, read the news. The world could move as it wanted, but this small hour was hers. And so her day always began with tea. Sometimes black, sometimes green. It was warm, gentle, calming, and in her mind harmless. She didn't skip breakfast. She took her medications. She even went for a short walk when the weather allowed. But the morning fatigue persisted. Her doctor had adjusted her prescriptions, recommended more iron, even suggested more stretching. But nothing quite explained the lingering fog. Until one checkup. Her new nurse asked a question that stopped her. How much water do you drink when you wake up? Lillian blinked. I don't. I mean, I have tea. It didn't seem odd. Tea had water in it. Didn't that count? One, skipping water, going straight to coffee or tea. What Lillian didn't realize, and what many seniors overlook, is that after hours of sleep, our bodies are naturally dehydrated. The body loses moisture through breath, through temperature regulation, even through the dry air of a quiet bedroom. And the very first thing we consume in the morning sets the tone for how our organs function the rest of the day, especially the heart. Tea and coffee, even in small amounts, can act as mild diuretics, encouraging the body to release fluid rather than replenish it. For someone in their 70s, that means more than just dry lips or a foggy mind. It means the blood thickens slightly. The heart pumps harder to push it through vessels. The strain is minor, but cumulative. Lillian's heart, once strong and dependable, was now working overtime before she'd even opened the curtains. The shift began small. Her doctor asked her to try one simple change. Drink a full glass of room temperature water before having her tea. Nothing fancy. No lemon. No ice. Just water. The first few days felt strange. Lillian missed the scent of her steeping tea, the comfort of her cup, but she gave it a chance. She poured the water the night before and set it by her bedside. In the morning, before her feet hit the floor, she sipped it slowly, and within a week, she noticed the difference. Her dizziness began to fade. Her thoughts felt clearer by the time she opened the blinds. Her heartbeat, something she had started feeling too often, settled into a steadier rhythm. Even her hands, usually stiff and cold in the early hours, began to move with more ease. She still had her tea, but it came second. 2. Emotional and practical insights. The heart needs support, especially as we age. But support doesn't always look like medicine or machines. Sometimes, it looks like kindness, like stillness, like one glass of water, when the body needs it most. For Lillian, the shift wasn't just in her body, it was in her mind. She realized that being set in her ways didn't mean she couldn't gently adjust them, that aging wasn't the end of learning, but a new beginning for listening. She even began leaving a note on her kitchen counter, next to her teacup. It read, "Water first. For your heart." This small ritual became her way of choosing herself before the world called her name. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it mattered. Her daughter noticed it too. One morning while visiting, she asked, "What's with the water on your nightstand?" Lillian smiled. "It's a little kindness I didn't know I needed," and practically, here's what worked for her. She kept a ceramic jug of water next to her bed. So it wasn't cold, just neutral. She used a decorative glass, something she enjoyed holding. She sipped slowly, while sitting on the edge of the bed, letting her body ease into the day. Over time this became habit, and habit became care. Lillian's heart still carried her through every morning, but now it didn't have to do it alone. Lillian's journey began with something as simple as a glass of water. That single act, placing hydration before habit, opened a quiet door in her mind. For the first time in years, she was making space for change, not because she had to, but because she could. Her mornings, once rigid and automatic, began to shift, and with that shift came awareness. She started noticing more, how her body responded, how her energy lifted, and how small discomforts weren't just part of aging, but messages asking to be heard. This awareness didn't just stay in the kitchen. It followed her into the next moments of her morning, moments she had never thought to question. What if the problem wasn't just what she consumed, but how she moved? What if her heart wasn't just affected by liquids and food, but by rhythm and pressure, silence and suddenness? Lillian, now more open and curious, began noticing how her body felt when she first stood up, and how easily she felt dizzy. She also started noticing how, the moment she reached for her phone or turned on the news, her mood and her heart reacted. These were the new clues, and the next chapter of change had already begun. Now that Lillian had gently reshaped the very start of her morning, she turned her attention to what happened next. It was no longer enough to hydrate. Her body was asking for patience, presence, and a more thoughtful rhythm. That first act of kindness, drinking water, showed her the value of being intentional, so she began looking more closely at the automatic things she did immediately after: rising from bed, walking to the bathroom, reaching for her phone, turning on the television. They seemed like nothing, but they were everything. Her transformation was no longer just internal, it was becoming physical. She realized that certain movements and mental triggers were placing stress on her system, before she'd even had a chance to feel grounded. These weren't dramatic actions. They were subtle, familiar, repetitive, and they were slowly draining her heart's strength. In this phase, two quiet habits came into focus. One involved how quickly she moved. The other, how quickly she let the outside world in. By giving both a new rhythm, she wasn't just protecting her heart, she was reclaiming her mornings. The shift wasn't loud or difficult. It was about small softness, waiting a few seconds, changing a first impulse, letting her body lead. 3. Getting up too fast from bed. Every morning, Lillian's alarm would buzz softly at 7:15. She'd swing her legs over the edge of the bed, push herself upright, and stand within seconds. It was how she'd always done it, but lately, something felt off. She'd feel lightheaded. Sometimes, her knees would wobble. Other times, her chest would flutter in a way that startled her. It didn't feel serious enough to report, but it didn't feel right either. It turns out, rising too quickly can be a silent shock to the system, especially after hours of lying down. Blood pools in the lower body during sleep, and when we stand too fast, blood pressure drops, and the heart works overtime to balance us. For seniors, this postural shift can strain the heart and increase fall risk. Lillian's doctor suggested a change that felt odd at first: wait 30 seconds after sitting up. During that time, she could roll her ankles, flex her toes, and take deep breaths. Then, once standing, pause again. So she tried it. It felt strange, almost lazy, but soon she noticed her body responded better. No spinning sensation, no racing heart, just quiet readiness. She even began placing a small note card on her nightstand that read, "Sit, breathe, rise gently." It became a moment of grace, not just caution. 4. Checking the news or phone immediately. Once Lillian made it to the kitchen, it had always been habit to reach for her phone or switch on the television. The background murmur of the world gave her something to catch up on. Headlines, updates, even just noise. But she started noticing something else. Her chest would tighten, not always, but often. The barrage of notifications, the urgent tones of news anchors, even the passive scroll of headlines, it all arrived too soon. She hadn't even said good morning to herself. Yet her heart was already on high alert. Studies show that exposing ourselves to stress triggers immediately upon waking causes a sharp spike in cortisol, the body's stress hormone. For seniors, whose systems are more sensitive, this can translate into elevated heart rate, tighter vessels, and unnecessary strain on an already aging heart. So, Lillian tried a new rhythm. Instead of news, she opened a window. Instead of headlines, she read a short poem from an old anthology her husband once gifted her. She still checked the news, but not until later, after her heart had fully woken up. That change rewired her mood. She felt less anxious, more present. Her mornings didn't feel invaded. They felt owned, and her heart, it thanked her in the quietest, steadiest way possible, by beating calmly, without protest. With small but powerful morning shifts in motion, hydrating first, rising gently, and choosing quiet presence over instant news, Lillian found her mornings no longer overwhelmed her. Her energy felt steadier, her thoughts clearer, her heart calmer. These practices brought her back to her body. She no longer moved through her mornings on autopilot. Instead, she moved with intention. That presence was new to her. It gave her a quiet confidence, the sense that she was no longer bracing for the day, but preparing to meet it, gently, on her own terms. Building on this momentum, she began to observe even more closely. She asked herself, "What else am I doing that I've never questioned?" The answer came not from her thoughts, but from her breath. She noticed how often she sighed deeply, after stepping out of the shower, her chest heavy, her heart fluttering, not from emotion, but from physical reaction. That's when she began to explore one more ritual she had never once doubted, her early morning hot shower. It had always felt like comfort, like a hug she gave herself. But something in her body told her to listen more closely. It was time to understand what that warmth was doing on the inside. Inspired by these shifts, Lillian turned her attention to the part of her morning that came right after her first cup of tea, the shower. It had always been a form of solace, especially in the quieter years of her life. The steam, the heat, the silence, it felt like a place where she could gather herself before facing the rest of the day. But with her awareness sharpened, she began noticing subtle signals. Her breathing would feel more labored after stepping out, her skin flushed, her heartbeat faster than it had been before. She stood longer than usual in the steam, not out of luxury, but necessity, waiting to feel stable again. This wasn't about hygiene, it was about routine. Lillian, like many, assumed that hot showers in the morning were helpful, even soothing. But now, she started wondering, what if that very warmth was creating pressure she didn't need? In this next chapter, Lillian's story reveals the surprising impact of temperature on the aging cardiovascular system. It wasn't just about what was soothing to the senses. It was about what was sustainable for the heart. And as she learned to pay attention to those details, her mornings grew not just calmer, but safer. 5. Taking hot showers first thing. The shower had always been Lillian's reset button. She would turn the knob to full heat, wait for the fog to fill the bathroom, and step in like entering a sanctuary. But behind that veil of comfort was something unseen: vascular dilation. When the body is exposed to hot water, especially first thing in the morning, it experiences a rapid expansion of blood vessels. This sudden shift can cause a drop in blood pressure, and for seniors, it can make the heart work harder to stabilize circulation. The heat may feel relaxing, but internally, it can create a wave of imbalance. Lillian didn't know any of this until she began tracking how she felt after showering. Lightheaded, flushed, short of breath. She once thought these were symptoms of aging, but they were signs of stress, the kind her heart didn't need. Her doctor explained it simply. At her age, Starting the day with extreme temperatures could confuse her body's natural regulation mechanisms, especially on colder mornings. Going from a warm bed to a hot shower could trigger vascular shocks, leaving her more vulnerable to dizziness or fatigue. Lillian began experimenting, adjusting the water to lukewarm, keeping the bathroom door slightly open, shortening her showers by a few minutes. The results were quiet but powerful. Her post-shower fatigue faded, her energy became more even, her heart stopped signaling distress, and her mornings gained another layer of balance. 6. Emotional and practical insights. Emotionally, this change carried a quiet weight. Lillian had always viewed the shower as her sacred space. The idea of modifying it felt, at first, like a loss. But the moment she reframed it, not as giving something up, but as giving herself something better, everything shifted. This wasn't about eliminating comfort, it was about redefining it. Real comfort, she realized, supported the body instead of straining it. Real comfort made her feel safer afterward, not just during. She began creating small rituals around her new approach. Instead of waiting for the steam to fog the mirror, she opened the bathroom window slightly to let the cool air mingle with the warmth. She placed a small folded towel nearby to sit on afterward, giving her a minute to breathe before continuing her routine. She even replaced her heavy robe with a lighter wrap that didn't trap heat against her chest. The transformation was quiet, but internally something powerful was happening. Her mornings no longer depended on extremes. They became a soft return to herself, a steady awakening rather than a jolt. And the more she honored these small truths, the more her heart seemed to agree. With so much already achieved, gentle hydration, mindful movement, and a more heart-conscious approach to daily rituals, Lillian's mornings had become quieter, clearer, and more supportive. She no longer felt like she was rushing through her first hours. Instead, she was fully present in them. This presence created space for something else. Awareness. The kind that notices how a body feels after certain choices. The kind that listens not just to the mind, but to the heart itself. She had become someone who paid attention to subtle shifts, someone who gave her body permission to speak. And with these deeper patterns of self-care forming, Lillian began turning her attention to the next piece of her routine, what she put on her plate. It had always been the same, a simple breakfast, modest portions, nothing she considered indulgent. But just as she had never questioned her hot showers, or the pace at which she rose from bed, she had never paused to examine what that first meal might be doing beneath the surface. Now, with her heart feeling more supported and her mornings more grounded, she was ready to look closer. The answers, as before, came quietly, but their impact was anything but small. Having come this far, Lillian understood something vital. What comforts us isn't always what supports us. This new phase of her transformation would bring that lesson home in a deeply personal way. It wasn't about removing comfort, it was about discovering where old comforts might be quietly undermining health. She had taken care of her rituals, she had softened her mornings, but the food specifically, her breakfast, remained untouched. For decades it had included the same staples. A slice of toast with jam, sometimes a bowl of cereal, occasionally instant oatmeal, and a splash of juice. Nothing extravagant, nothing harmful, at least on the surface. But as she tuned more deeply into how she felt afterward, she began noticing patterns: a sudden crash in energy by mid-morning, a tightness in her chest after particularly sweet or salty choices, a general sluggishness that even her new rituals couldn't fully ease. This was the final piece, the nutrition, the foundation. In this part of her journey, Lillian would uncover the hidden heart risks buried in innocent breakfast items, and learn to nourish herself in a way that felt just as comforting but far more supportive. This was no longer about change. It was about completion, and the clarity that comes when every piece begins to align. 7. High sugar or high-sodium breakfasts. The trouble started with a box of cereal. Lillian had bought it on sale, lightly sweetened, advertised as heart-healthy, and adorned with images of whole grains. It seemed like a safe, even responsible choice. But one morning, after having a bowl with milk and a glass of orange juice, she felt it, an odd fluttering in her chest, and a strange, heavy fog in her thoughts. She checked the label. What she found surprised her: over 18 grams of sugar per serving. Combined with the juice and jam on her toast, her modest breakfast contained more than double the recommended sugar intake for someone her age, and enough sodium to rival a fast food meal. For a heart that had already worked overtime for 7 decades, these levels weren't just unhealthy, they were destabilizing. Processed breakfast foods, instant oats, boxed cereals, fruit yogurts, flavored creamers, even seemingly innocent spreads, all carried hidden burdens. Excess sugar causes blood sugar spikes, followed by crashes, which can trigger irregular heart rhythms. Sodium raises blood pressure subtly but consistently, and both contribute to inflammation, a slow, dangerous enemy to the heart muscle. Lillian began making changes. She switched her toast to a grainier option, reduced spreads to half, and swapped cereal for a warm bowl of unsweetened oats, topped with berries and ground flaxseed. These weren't just dietary shifts, they were acts of understanding. With each adjustment, Lillian's mornings became less reactive and more restorative. Her heart stopped lurching. Her energy leveled out. She no longer needed to sit down mid-morning, because her blood sugar had crashed. She felt nourished, not just fed. But beyond the physical, something deeper settled inside her, a kind of peace. She realized that true care, the kind that lasts, was never dramatic. It was quiet, intentional, cumulative. Every part of her morning now supported her, from the water by her bedside, to the pause before rising, to the calm presence she chose over headlines, to the warmth that didn't overwhelm, and finally to the food that gave her strength without stealing her calm. This wasn't about giving things up, it was about giving herself what she had always deserved, a morning that honored her heart. And as Lillian sat down with her cup of herbal tea, her new breakfast, and the quiet sun spilling across the table, she didn't feel like someone fighting aging. She felt like someone finally living it well, not despite her years, but because of them. The journey wasn't ending, it was unfolding, one gentle, powerful morning at a time. With these foundational habits in place, gentle hydration, patient movement, reduced stimulation, mindful showering, and supportive nutrition, Lillian's mornings no longer felt like a survival routine. They had become her sanctuary. She was no longer reacting to the day ahead. She was preparing for it with clarity and presence. And yet, as her awareness deepened, so did her understanding. Even with so many physical changes in place, there was something missing, a space for intention, breath, and stillness. Her transformation had given her energy, but not yet peace. Her heart felt steadier, but not fully at rest. That peace wouldn't come from food or pacing, or temperature. It would come from the space between moments, from how she connected with herself before the outside world arrived. And it was in that realization that the final phase began. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly powerful, and deeply human. As her transformation neared its peak, Lillian realized that the final changes weren't about eliminating bad habits. They were about welcoming new rituals that nourished her emotional and spiritual heart, just as much as her physical one. These last habits weren't about fixing problems. They were about rooting her new morning rhythm in joy and clarity, making the changes sustainable, not through discipline, but through meaning. Each one added a soft but powerful dimension to her morning: breath, movement, intention. They weren't external changes, like what to eat or when to rise. They were internal alignments, shaping how she met the world before the world asked anything of her. In this final phase, Lillian discovered that starting the day without breathing or movement rituals was the silent barrier between her and a sense of peace. Adding them didn't just complete her morning, it completed her. 8. Starting the day without breathing or movement rituals. Habit 1. The first habit Lillian explored was the act of intentional breathing, not to calm panic, not to push through stress, but simply to arrive. For most of her life, she had breathed automatically, like anyone else. But one morning, after waking early and sitting by her bedroom window, she realized her breath was shallow. Her chest was moving, but she wasn't really inhaling. It was a kind of holding, like bracing, and she didn't know why. She began trying something new. 3 slow breaths. Right after sitting up in bed, she'd inhale through her nose, hold for just a moment, and then exhale slowly through her mouth. At first, it felt strange, almost exaggerated, but the quiet that followed was undeniable. Her heartbeat settled, her shoulders softened, her thoughts slowed. It became her way of arriving into her body, into her morning, into herself. She wasn't rushing forward anymore. She was finally starting from within. 9. Starting the day without breathing or movement rituals. Habit 2. The second habit was gentle movement, not exercise, not stretching for fitness, but waking the body with kindness. Lillian had always believed that movement had to be purposeful, walks, chores, effort, but now she explored a different kind of movement, one without goals, one just for her. She began with small motions, rolling her ankles, circling her wrists, swaying gently from side to side in her chair. These weren't workouts, they were awakenings. Each one told her body, "I'm listening, I care." On colder mornings, she'd place her hands on her chest and rub small circles over her heart, not to do something right, but to connect. It was a form of attention she had never learned to give herself. What surprised her wasn't the physical result, it was the emotional one. These moments didn't just stretch her joints, they stretched her ability to feel safe in her body again, to start the day as someone cared for. 10. Starting the day without breathing or movement rituals. Habit 3. The final habit Lillian added was spoken gratitude, not journaling, not affirmations, but simple words said aloud, just for herself.
It began spontaneously.
One morning she sat with her tea and whispered, "Thank you for today." She wasn't sure where the words came from, but they felt right. She began doing it daily. Sometimes she'd thank her home for its warmth, sometimes she'd thank her body for waking up, sometimes she'd just thank the quiet. These tiny spoken rituals gave her mornings a kind of completeness. It was no longer just about physical health, it was about recognizing the gift of the day before anything happened. Even on harder mornings, when her joints ached or the sky felt heavy, she still spoke, and in speaking she softened. The day hadn't even begun, and she had already chosen grace. Lillian's journey began with a single glass of water. What followed was a morning slowly rebuilt, habit by habit, breath by breath. Now, as she moved through her mornings with more intention, she no longer felt like she was aging into limitation. She was aging into herself, into clarity, into calm. Every shift she made was small, none required perfection, but together they changed everything. Her heart, once burdened by quiet routines she never questioned, now moved through the morning, supported not strained, and perhaps most powerfully of all, her sense of self was no longer separate from her routine. It was woven into it. With every sip, every pause, every breath, Lillian became not just older but wiser, softer, fuller. These habits weren't just for her, they became a quiet legacy, something she could pass on through presence alone, not by teaching, but by living.
Your mornings hold more power than you know.
Like Lillian, you can start small and feel everything shift. These habits aren't just routines, they're quiet gifts to your heart, your mind, your spirit. Begin with one change. Let it lead you to a morning and a life you love again.